But the most important thing is we've got 3D seismic over this whole block, and we actually see that structure rising on the other side of the fault C. So we've actually tested the lowest part. And, in our business, as you move up structure, you enter into the better part of the reservoir. So it's really, really, I think from a information point of view, it couldn't have been any more exciting for us.
Hello, you're watching Proact, and I'm joined by Touchstone Exploration CEO, Paul Bay. Paul, very good to speak with you. You've clearly been busy in recent weeks. What's the key highlight from your perspective from the updates issued this morning?
I think there's probably two big takeaways from it. The first is that we've got the test results of the first two wells, sort of I'll call them development wells or step-out wells at the Cascadura field. And, really interesting results. One looks like a terrific development well, and the other one actually is I'd almost put it marginally on an exploration well because it's into acreage that we had no reserves booked and extends the field, further to the east. So that's, from a gas point of view, that's terrific. And then the second takeaway was it was a really significant oil test in the deepest part of the last well, which is something new to us, and it just sets up a really fantastic opportunity further for us on the block.
For a non-technical person, what are the implications of the pressure readings you had in the two wells?
Yeah, and I think that's it's a really good question. I mean, the one thing that we promised to shareholders was to give them continuous updates here, and ideally, what we would have loved to have been able to do is give them test results, which are more traditional. But we're going to test into our gathering line, which is still a couple of weeks away from getting done. So the idea of what the pressures tell them is really it's two things it tells us. One is in the one well, it obviously shows that it's a gas column and it looks very similar to what we've seen. And in the other well, what it does is it shows it's very high pressure gas that we're going to see down the road as we go. So it's not exactly what we would have liked to have been able to show. Like, you'd love to see test results. But the issue for us is it would have cost about $1 million to bring the test equipment in, and that doesn't seem to make any sense. It makes more sense to wait a couple of weeks and test it into the pipeline. So that's why, the pressure data really, I think, sort of shows the significance, the size of the pool, and the pressures that we're dealing with. So from our point of view, from a technical point of view, it's really exciting. It's exactly what we were looking for, as well as some new things that we didn't expect to see.
If testing goes well, when could these wells be on stream producing?
Yeah, they will be on by October 17th. They may be on sooner than that, but we weren't able to do the final tie-in of the wells while we were testing them. It's just, it doesn't make sense to have welders on site when you're flowing natural gas wells. That's just not a good HSE issue. So we need to get the testing done first and then do this final connecting piece. So the team's on that right now. In the release, we put in October 17th. We're hoping we can move that up a little bit for the final pieces that we have to do.
You flagged that the discovery to the east side of the fault C could open up new opportunities, Paul. Can you give us a sense of the potential there?
Yeah, I think that's, as we talked about a little earlier here, that's the real big takeaway. That fault C is the big fault, and, not to get too technical, but that's kind of where we had seen the end of the pool. And, this well crossed over onto the other side, which we thought, it should have reserves, and now we've proven that it does. So it sets up basically a brand new pool, if you want to call it that, as we move to these. But the most important thing is we've got 3D seismic over this whole block, and we actually see that structure rising on the other side of the fault C. So we've actually tested the lowest part. And, in our business, as you move up structure, you enter into the better part of the reservoir. So it's really, really, I think from a information point of view, it couldn't have been any more exciting for us.
Paul, your acquisition of Trinity has fallen through. How much of a disappointment was that? And how does it impact your plans or strategy for the rest of this year and into 2025?
Yeah, that just, we got released from our 2.7 obligations last week on Thursday. Obviously disappointed, but we couldn't match the higher value that the other bidders saw. We just couldn't get to that number. It didn't make sense to us. It's frustrating that late in the process, after they had shareholder approval, that somebody could still come along and bid. But that's a technicality we don't really need to focus on. It doesn't affect any of the things we were doing from a field point of view. You know, and I think with what we've now seen in these two wells, you know, especially the oil test and the higher pressure gas, it's not the end of the world not having done the Trinity deal. You know, that was about a 25% dilutive deal. So these two wells are much more impactful now without the Trinity deal having been done. So, you know, as my dad always said, everything happens for a reason. So maybe there was a reason here. So we'll look to the bright side of that.
Well, always look to the bright side, Paul. Thank you very much for the update today.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Touchstone Exploration CEO, Paul Bay.